On this episode, I sit down with Charles Celesia, who is the lead of the Charles Celesia team out of Miami, Florida. Today, he'll share his elegant strategy for retaining clients for life. We also unpack his experience around working in the luxury sector of the market, why a short response time is key to winning new business, and most importantly, we talk about how to balance work and personal life. Before we get started, let's help you stay connected to top performing realtors across the nation by hitting that subscribe button now. And without further ado, I'm your host, Shawn Kunkler. Charles, what's happening, man?
Shawn, pleasure to be here. Nice to see you as always.
Yeah, man. Thanks for doing this. I mean, we just chatted briefly before, but I know this is your first endeavor, so.
First time. Usually try to hide behind the camera. I'm a little bit more discreet, low key, and but still enjoy all of our conversations that we've been having for 2 years now, maybe 3.
Yeah, I think it's now closer to 3. So people can kind of get context. We're part of a mastermind group, a national group, and we catch up once a month and talk about business and marketing and strategy. And yeah, I actually have always enjoyed your insights. And actually, not that long ago, a couple episodes ago, Jason Rowland out of Chicago was on.
I saw a little teaser on Instagram about that. That's caught my eye.
He has some good sound bites, that's for sure. He's a fun dude.
I'm sure he does. Probably much more entertaining than me, but it's okay.
It's all good. We're all different, and that's the best part of this business. So this is what I do with everybody, so just bear with it. But who are you and what do you do?
I am Charles Celesia. I am a realtor here in Miami with Compass. I was a founding agent, so the 5th Compass agent in all of Florida. It's been very interesting to see all of the ebbs and the flows and the good press, the bad press, how people react so quickly to everything, and how at the end, everything kind of still flows for Compass. And I have a team of 3 with me, which has been awesome to continue to grow and learning experience. And it's amazing because I think the best part about Compass is meeting people like you, and we have these real relationships with people in the best markets and most important markets in America. And I think as an agent outside of Compass, you don't really get a feel for that and how real these relationships are. It's not just like, hey, I know 20 different agents, I'll find one by going through their profile. It's like, no, hey, like I know this guy, I've known him for years, and I know that he's going to give you the same level of service that I provide, and I can recommend him. And that goes a long way for me.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up such a good point, is having a really strong referral network in this. I mean, the reality is this business, you'll never do any deal alone. You always need this team around you. And then if you're doing anything at scale, at volume, like you are, you need that. You also need that team on a national level. So yeah, you're right. Like when I have a client who's moving to an area that I have somebody already there, it's like this weird sigh of relief. I'm like, oh my goodness, like I already know who will take care of them. Like, because it's a bit of a wild card sometimes. Like you look somebody up and you're like, they seem good, but are they really a good fiduciary? Do they really look out for the client? And you know the drill.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's much better than going on Zillow and sorting through the different contexts, and then you have to call and screen that person, which a lot of people don't do, which is also important. But I think knowing that if we were to connect on a referral, I'm sure you'd reply right away, which is very important to me and also very important to the clients. And it's been incredible.
It's funny, this podcast, believe it or not, it's either past relationships that I've had and I'm inviting people on, or I was shopping for an agent in a market and this agent just like outshined everybody else. And I'm like, I have to have you on. Like, whatever you're doing, we can all learn from this. And so come on to the podcast and we're going to unpack it.
how did you find those people that you didn't know? Like where did you go to find those people that stood out?
The back office will basically they'll pull a few agents in an area. So I'll give like the high level of like, hey, I have a client who's looking in New York. They have a $2 million budget. Can you pull the top, like do your research and pull the top 6 names? And then they'll send me, I'll get a list of names, and then I do a high level look through them. And then, I read their bio because I think the bio is important. That's their marketing. Agents always usually craft their own, or it's very high touch. So it's how they want to be perceived. And I think you can actually glean a lot from that. And then I pick up the phone, and it's wild. What's wild to me is I had a conversation with Chris, who was on this podcast, of how many people don't call back. Not only not answer, but don't call me back, or they'll call me back in like 3 days. And you're like, sorry, that lead is gone days ago, literally.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Within that, I usually will unpack it with a small handful of questions. Like, tell me about your last deal. Tell me about the biggest challenge you had. How did you resolve that? Because I think everybody's going to brag about what they did right, but I ask lenders this too. Tell me about your worst transaction and how did you work for your client? You learn a lot about somebody.
Especially coming from a lender, that I've just stories going through my head now. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that the bio, something you mentioned about the bio is very important. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many people, when I physically meet them for the first time, and these are prospective clients, they're like, oh, my wife is a runner too. And I'm like, how did you know I was a runner? And it's because it's in my bio. And I think that those things are what people look for. They look for like that human element to it. It's not like, hey, I mean, of course, yes, you want to know how much you've sold, where you specialize in, but also that it's like something that you can relate to on a human level. And I think it's important to spend time on crafting that bio. And going into my career, uh, it was kind of that I didn't understand that, and then as time evolved, and I see how important the bio is. It's a pretty cool feeling too when they come up and they're like, they actually read my bio. They care about me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice when they do research and they connect with something other than, oh, you sold this many houses. And most people don't. That's not memorable because it's not their industry. They don't care. They really genuinely don't care. People want to know what you're going to do for them.
That's right. And I can't remember, I think it was one of the either a post on Workplace or one of the marketing emails, or maybe even Leonard had said it, but somebody is always the best at something and everybody crafts it. So it's like, hey, I'm number one at this, this, and this. And people kind of get tired of that. They want to feel that there's that human connection and that you'll understand them when they're going through one of the biggest transactions in their lives.
Yeah. Well, and it's like if you're a runner, for example, I'm a terrible runner. I can maybe do a couple miles and I'm like dying.
I'm terrible these days too, so it's okay.
But when you do a longer mileage, there's the runner's high, the fatigue, the pushing through it. A friend of mine who was a surgeon in San Francisco, she said, no one can fully respect like how much training it takes to be a surgeon except for another surgeon.
Very true. That's a good point there. Yeah. I mean, it's it yeah, and I think that, I mean, going off topic kind of, running, it kind of taught me a lot about, and I grew up an athlete. It taught me a lot about kind of working through all of the hard times and pushing through that pain and pushing through difficulties in transactions or whatever the case may be. And that's somebody else. I think Jason, even on one of our calls, like the athletes, or maybe it was you. There's something about that athletic, that competition, that competitive drive to be the best at whatever it is that you're doing. And I that resonated with me when we spoke about that. And that's something that I meet a couple other Compass agents across the nation, and they've been athletes as well. And I'm like, oh my gosh, one guy, very interesting. He was a volleyball player, like overseas, and I'm like, what? You first of all, I didn't even know they played volleyball overseas, and it was pretty impressive.
It's really interesting if you actually go back and listen to this podcast from the beginning. Rebecca Donatelli was a épée fencer. Dan Lesniak is a like ultra marathon runner, triathlete.
Gosh. Yeah.
Nicole Klein, it was a professional ballet dancer.
Wow.
I mean, it was like at the list. Arjun Dingray, he was Taekwondo champion and is the coach of the U.S. team. Like, it's fascinating to me. I think when you're an athlete, you learn. Well, you not only get served a lot of humble pie, so you learn to take the licks. You learn to get up and you learn to not take it personally. But I also think something interesting with training, when I trained a lot for martial arts, is you invest. I find the longer you do anything competitive, you start investing less in winning the thing itself, and you start investing in the work. Like running the marathon isn't necessarily the goal. The goal is to give 100% on today's run. And then that makes you 1% better tomorrow. And tomorrow you give 100% on your run. But athletes love the run. And translating that to real estate, lead gen is at the root and the heart of what we do. The people who only focus on the sales, that's the win and lose. But if you focus and love the training, the lead gen, they're wildly successful. And there is definitely, and I'm not saying if you're not an athlete, you're not going to be an awesome realtor, but there are certain patterns that show up. And I just find it interesting from these conversations and observations of people, and what are the common threads? What's that one thing that's connecting a lot of these top performers? And it's something to do with being an athlete in some capacity.
It's pretty impressive, the list of people that you've had on already. So how many podcasts have you recorded up to this point?
We're probably like 13 or 14.
Wow. And I mean, it seems like at least half or more than half of those have been people that are pretty impressive athletes to one degree or another. I mean, that's very interesting.
Clint, who's on one of the episodes, I actually had him on because I wanted to talk about the training aspect, but he's the trainer who writes all my programs, and he is an IFBB pro, professional bodybuilder. So I was like, oh, he's somebody really interesting to talk to because of this specific topic. But it's wild, man. I would have to go through it, but I would say probably 3/4 of the past guests have been competitive athletes at some point in their life or currently, or they currently still work out.
I'm curious who that ultra marathoner was, because they have a lot more crazy in them than I do.
100 miles is that's a whole level of crazy.
Yeah, that takes a very special human being to number one, say, I want to do this and I want to put my body through this, but number two, to actually get through that is it's incredible. And I mean, I think, again, runners appreciating runners, even just pushing for a marathon, 26.2 miles. I watched the Miami half marathon this past weekend. My father and fiance were competing in it, and it's just like you see these people go past and they are in so much pain, and it's only 13.1 miles, and you think about almost times 10 the ultra marathon. I just can't even imagine.
It's one of those things I don't have a place for it in my brain because it's so hard to comprehend. So, man, you just mentioned your father and fiance competed, but you didn't. What was up with that?
So I actually used to be so I ran at George Mason. I used to be relatively fast. And when I would race, I would be competing. I would actually be, if it was a smaller race, there's a chance I was maybe first or second. If it was a larger race, I'd still be up there, even after I stopped training, like as if it were my life. So there's something in there, my pride, that's just like, if I'm going out there, I'm not going to be just, somewhere to say I finished. And I get a lot of slack for that from my family, from my friends, from other runners, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's okay. You don't have to win. You don't have to." But for me, I'm holding on to those memories of when what used to be, and I think unless you've competed and you've excelled in those type of competitions, it you kind of don't really understand the feeling of no longer being able to compete the way you used to. And I've already had to accept that in basketball as I age, and as I'm not as quick as I used to be. My knees, everything. I just there's so many things. I think in that I've already in basketball I've already accepted. Okay, I can't win every game. I can't make every shot like I used to. So I'm out here to have fun and get a good workout in, and I haven't let myself accept that for running yet. But in the meantime, I get to see my family compete, which is awesome. Anna, my fiance, she's always been athletic, but never really run. Her first race ever was a half marathon. And like, usually people start out with like a 5K, 10K, and she just dove right on in and she's really embraced it. And my father, who, has kind of been, he's formulated who I am, a lot of my personality and my mentality. He actually just placed first in his age group at age 75.
Damn. Good on him.
He had two partial knee replacements and a partially torn Achilles, and he still placed first in his age group at 75. So if that tells you anything about my father,
that's amazing. It reminds me. There's one of my favorite quotes is results, not excuses.
Absolutely.
When people are half that age and they're like, I can't do it because I have a hangnail. You're like, hold on. This guy has two partial knee replacements. He's double your age and all this other stuff going on. You're fine.
Turning it all back into real estate. I live a block away from my parents, which is, like one of the best blessings at this point in time in my life.
Yeah.
We bought our house, which was August of 2021. The seller of that house works out at the community gym where my father works out. And when we walked in, he was he recognized my father right away. He was like, "Oh, you work out at the gym?" And my father was like, "Yeah, yeah, there are a couple days a week." And he was like, "Wow, I hopefully one day I'll be as fit as you are." And actually, my father was the reason why we got that house. It was super competitive market down here in Miami, and it was just that like, hey, I live close to my parents, the seller, and I want whoever buys it to have that same connection to their family. And it ended up being the reason why we were chosen to get the house, which was pretty cool. So again, it all ties back to that human element, that personal touch, not like, who's necessarily the best of the best. It was pretty cool for us. And again, it's been amazing living next to family and being able to see them whenever we want to.
That is really cool. It sounds like that was before, it sounds like that was when we were still able to submit love letters to the sellers prior to the newer revised Fair Housing Act.
Yeah, that's sounds about right. Yeah, yeah. Although our love letter was in the form of a physical presence rather than an actual letter.
Oh, there you
But
go.
yeah, no, I mean, yeah,
that's true. You're a realtor. You actually got to interact in a different way.
That's right. I mean, it's also crazy how everything has progressed the past couple of years, and markets have changed so quickly. And we've been discussing it, and I think kind of felt the same ups and downs and turns, and sometimes almost overnight. And how's everything over there now? First couple of weeks of the year
in San Francisco, it swings. I mean, it's 1 week to the next. It's a different market. When we're recording this is different than when it's dropping. So I'm sure it'll be different. I'm sure it'll be different by the time this even gets edited. So next week, but we've recently seen, it seems like buyers are getting a little bit more comfortable. There's a little bit more certainty in the market and they're starting to come back. We saw an uptick in open houses in the past 2 weeks, but not the numbers that we saw months ago, even a year ago.
Fair enough.
However, it's been a nice breath of fresh air into the market just because we saw so much gridlock. It's certain houses certainly get more activity than others, and there's some that get overlooked. But I would say overall we're starting to trend in a better direction, which is nice. My phone's starting to ring a little bit more. People who they're starting to dip their toe in that. If buyers are coming to me and they're starting to dip their toe, they're probably another 3 months before they're fully matured and getting into it. So I don't know. It's still one of those. We'll see. It's looking like it's moving in the right direction, but the feds can move a needle and just change it all radically from us. What are you seeing on your side?
Yeah, I think the same over here. So like end of last year, which would kind of be the beginning of our season. So season for Miami is traditionally kicks off with Art Basel, which is the first week in December. Art Basel was busy; it was slammed, and after that, it kind of just went quiet. And you're like, oof, you get a little nervous. But then, like first couple of weeks of January was slam packed again, and it feels good. I think like you said, a lot of people they feel a little bit more certain. What they expected to happen last year didn't happen. Interest rates have also come down a little bit from where they were, and I think it just provides a little bit more comfort in the decisions. And people are tired of paying so much money in rent too, and that's another component of it. And there's just nothing available on the buy side, on the rent side, and I think that's where it's a little bit complicated. It's definitely picking up, and I feel optimistic. I think most people will tell you that they also feel optimistic here in Miami, but also at the same time, is it going to slow down as soon as season ends? We'll see. Hopefully not, but it's certainly possible.
Yeah, and you've been in the game for a while. How long have you been a realtor?
Since 2011, so it has been a long time.
A long time.
There's a lot of gray. Maybe you may not be able to see it here, but I'm it's there, and it's yeah. No, I mean, I have so many great memories, but there's also stressful times, and I think we're on all of the time, and I've tried to teach myself the past couple of years. It's okay to take a little bit of time to myself, and I think that's very important. It's something I've been focusing a little bit more on recently, which is doing things that uh, you know, take me away from work, whether it be running or basketball or traveling for a week or 10 days, whatever the case may be. But just making sure that I'm focusing on other things as well and setting other goals outside of work. But yeah, I mean, what are you doing outside of work yourself? I mean, are you still training martial arts or?
No, I jacked myself up from doing martial arts.
Hmm.
I mean, even sitting here now, I have a chiropractor appointment next week. I have like a bulging disc that's flaring up, and yeah, just it's hard on your body. And so I kind of trended out of that, but I work out, just weight train and like that type of working out, which it's a little bit more stable, more controlled. I'm almost 50. So I still have that I have to be first mentality, but I also I really enjoy the workout. I was actually talking to Sky Michaels about this, who was also a competitive rower, but I want working out to be the worst, hardest part of my day in a really healthy way. Like I want that to be where I'm just like struggling. And then I want the strength that it gives me to be able to manage the business side. But I do like what you said. And I think people lose track of this is we all have work goals and we write business plans and we do all this stuff at the beginning of the year, but you should have personal goals too and things that you want to balance this out. I don't really truly believe in this work-life balance theory, but I think you should have things to balance it out. And mine is I'm looking into getting into overlanding, which if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of a mix between car camping and four-wheel adventures.
How did you end up on that? I mean, I've never even heard of this.
I don't know, man. YouTube, it's a dangerous place, but Yeah, it's super cool. And it's weird. I'm like nerding out on it lately. It's like there's basically four-wheel drive, like SUVs that you modify for off-road riding, but then you modify them so you have basically your camper with you.
Interesting. So are you currently modifying or have plans to modify one or
I'm going this weekend to buy one.
that's awesome.
I'm
What are you looking at?
the Defender, the Land Rover Defender,
Awesome.
which is just, I mean, it's a beautiful vehicle. It's probably shouldn't be taken four-wheel driving, but
Is it the newest model
yeah,
Defender or like late? Okay, interesting.
yeah.
That I mean, that's I can't wait to see how everything unfolds and how you turn it into this place where you can go four wheeling and camp out at the same time. That's awesome.
So for me is I wanted, as a realtor, we all know it's really hard to be like, hey, I'm with the traditional job, I'm shutting down. I'll see you all in 2 weeks. We don't necessarily have that. But I grew up in Connecticut and I grew up with dirt bikes and woods and snowmobiling and fishing. And so I enjoy that. But I live in a city. So I part of me misses it. So my partner and I, Cielo, we've been talking about, we're like, well, how do we basically bug out? Like on a Friday night, how do we just take off and come back on maybe Saturday? So just go for one night. And then it gets into like weird logistics and planning. And then that's how we kind of stumbled on this whole thing. And just, it's a way to basically throw a bunch of stuff in the back of the truck with some food and go hang out in nature and look at a tree and kind of find your center again and then come back to work.
Where do you go from where you are? I mean, I imagine there's like so many cool places. I mean, you guys in California, you have uh, different. I mean, even just the roads are so scenic, and we have some here. But I feel like for us, we'd have maybe like Everglades. You go out. I don't even know where I would go. Where so for you, is it somewhere close by? Are there different places you guys have on the map?
I mean, there's tons of places. If you go north, you're into mountains and snow. Like if you like a Lake Tahoe, for example, we have Yosemite. We actually just planned a trip to Yosemite. If you go down south, we have Joshua Tree, which is desert. We were just there a couple weeks ago. Beautiful. This is how I kind of got the bug. We were driving. This Defender drove past us, and it was all just like decked out. And I was basically like, what was that?
So I have to ask, why not a Bronco?
So I love them. Love the new Bronco. A buddy of mine brought a Bronco, and I just, it's the whole like, I'm too old to be samers, so it's just be different, and that's it.
I can appreciate that. Yeah, there's so I have a Bronco, and I'm trying to imagine going off-roading in it, and I just can't. But that so in North Carolina, not in Florida, maybe some parts, but in North Carolina, where my parents used to live, it's a common thing for people to off-road on the beach, and it's like they're known for allowing you to do that here. There's no chance. So I think I would take it on the beach, but I'm not sure how adventurous I would get outside of that. So I think kudos to you guys for for trying that. But yeah, no, I mean that's pretty cool. I'm definitely looking forward to hearing more about that as time progresses.
I'll text you a picture of my buddy's Bronco. It's gorgeous. It's lifted with the huge tires. It's absolutely beautiful.
Has to be. Every time I see one that's like the standard non Sasquatch or not lifted, I'm like,
Yeah, you're like, you want to pat it on the head. You're like, that's cute.
yeah, it is. Actually, that's exactly what I thought yesterday. I saw one that was just like the standard, and I was like, oh, that's cute, and it parked right next to me. It was kind of cute.
Yeah, they're cute. And that's why, yeah, I kind of want to go over the top. I mean, we have the Tesla, which is like the adult practical. I actually absolutely love driving that. And now we have something that we can bug out in on the weekend and just get away from clients, get away from everybody for a minute, find our centers and come back.
Yeah, at least we like the idea that we could get away, but probably not in reality. But at least we try.
Yeah, it's always it's like a nice theory. And the second you go away, I mean, it's funny. It's like if you want a deal, just plan a vacation. 3 of them will roll in
every time. Every time. I'm gonna try that. Try it again this summer. See what happens. Hopefully, something good comes from that.
Fingers crossed. Well, you had, my friend, a very big deal this past year, a $4.5 million.
That was a very interesting one, to say the least. And by Miami standards, 4.5 is it's not really newsworthy or noteworthy unless there are certain components of it that make it noteworthy. Every market is different, every price point in those markets are different. But this one was a very interesting one and a first for me. So, we had a friend of ours who's a celebrity, and yeah, it was a very different transaction in the fact that as soon as the press release went out, it was picked up everywhere. And I mean, it's very cool, but I think at the same time, when it's a celebrity client, it has to be controlled. And I think that that's something that's very important to them. So, what I learned and watched, and I was lucky enough to work side by side with Liz Hogan, who's one of the best in the biz here. It was pretty cool to see how everything unfolded. The press with us working with that client's press team, and really just incredible the amount of traction that it picked up. And open house was unbelievable in a time where, so this, just to give a little bit more context, it was the middle of the summer, which traditionally here things are dead. The market had started to soften. Interest rates jumped up greatly, and that kind of put everybody on the defense. And buyers they weren't submitting these crazy offers. They weren't buying these, just everything, anything, submitting whatever offer just to get a place. They were a little bit more conscious, taking their time. All of the other properties we were watching around this house were sitting, and they were sitting for a long time. And there were price drops, price drops, price drops. And all of the news that was coming out was bad. So this was probably the worst time to try this. But the sellers and their family, they worked so hard to do it right with us. And I mean, I don't know. It's amazing when you have sellers that participate, but I don't know if I've seen like 8 family members from the seller's family participate at once. It was unbelievable. Everybody helped out. Everybody was in it for the best result. And ultimately, they trusted us, with what we wanted to do, pricing and marketing wise. And we actually ended up selling for over 10% over the asking price in a market where everything was starting to linger and price reduction, price reduction, price reduction. So it was an interesting transaction.
And I'll actually add to that fast. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, you sold it within like 10 or 11 days.
We actually sold it within about 3 days, and we cleared all contingencies in about 10 days. So it was a very fast. Yeah, again, a lot went into it, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and from everybody. And there were a lot of issues to work through that we had to work very quickly through, and we were getting pressure from the buyer, pressure from all of the other brokers who were interested and that had submitted offers, and the attorneys, and then the sellers want to know what's going on with all these different requests and questions. So it was a very challenging but very rewarding transaction, and certainly happy to it was an honor to be able to represent them in that transaction. And I think I learned a lot from it, gained a lot of confidence. And it's just one of the many success stories when there's so many other transactions that we look at that don't have that necessarily that same result. And so it just makes it a little bit sweeter when you go through all of the crazy things in a normal transaction, and then you have one that, yes, was not easy, but at the same time very rewarding.
And with celebrities in San Francisco, we don't generally have the Hollywood celebrities. We have tech celebrities who also seek to keep their anonymity. With this client you were working with, was that the same scenario?
It was originally. but there had been a circumstance uh, when they bought the house that uh, there were articles in the past that tied this person to the house. So one way or another, the real deal, somebody would have picked up on it. So rather than allowing them to control what was being put out there, we decided collectively, let's work together and let's put out what we want to put out, and let's get out ahead of this and market it the best way that we can. And it was People Magazine, the Real Deal, everywhere you looked, and I mean that's pretty cool too to like have those. I'm not used to getting those type of press releases, so that was pretty cool also. In fact, one of the cooler gifts that I've received, and usually we're in the business of giving gifts. Liz, after the transaction closed, so we were in People Magazine, like a printed version. She got it framed and printed it out for me, which I thought was really really cool and like a class act on her end. So that was a nice touch. She's special.
Dude, that's classy, man. I like that. And you're super humble. I've known you for 3 years, and I had no idea you were in People Magazine.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's, it's, yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't have done it without them. And also it's just a little cool thing, to have on the side.
But that's what we talked about in the beginning. This is a team effort. Like we don't this any level of success in this business is not it's not just that one individual. It's the people we collectively surround ourselves with. What are some of the what were let kind of unpack some of the challenges. What were some of the big challenges you actually had throughout this transaction?
Well, so there was a very tight timeline to start with, and the sellers had been there for quite some time, so there were a lot of belongings. So just kind of starting from point A, the house needed to be staged in the sense of like not necessarily bringing new furniture in, but making sure that everything was out.
Yeah, deleting.
That's right. Yeah, and like personal items, personal art, personal pictures, even just belongings. Everything had to be out, and it had to be out within a very quick amount of time because that's just the way that things are sometimes. And I think that was the first part. Um, Outside of that, then there was the rush of like everybody wanting to see this house, whether or not they were actually interested. Like that open house was very overwhelming. And, thankfully, Liz was there. Mary from my team was there, who was awesome. And it was, I mean, I've never experienced an open house like that. So then, you have the pressure of people competing and always wanting to know, when is the decision going to be made? What can I do to have the best offer? And it's just like nonstop, nonstop. And, particularly at that price point, it's different, maybe if it's, kind of like an average sales price in, a different neighborhood or a condo downtown, because likely they can find another house. But it was a special house, special property, and we priced it very well.
Yeah.
Moving beyond that, in Miami, Coral Gables, Coconut Grove, a lot of the houses are 100 years old. And with 100-year-old houses, there are 100-year-old problems. And in parts of Miami, they're on sewer, other parts, they're on septic tanks. So this particular house is on a septic tank. And it turns out that the previous seller had paved over the septic tank.
Oh,
That is
that's a problem.
So that was actually probably the biggest challenge after we were in contract and getting past that. And we had a very tight inspection period. And it's also our duty to help the buyer and the buyer's agent expedite everything in a timely fashion, while keeping in mind that there are other people that are interested. If this buyer, for whatever reason, decides to cancel, we need to do this quickly and have all the answers and keep everybody ready on the sidelines just in case. So finding the septic tank I mean, that was a process. And yeah, it was not fun. And to find out that it's under the pavers of the driveway, yeah, that was that was interesting. But we worked it all out. Everybody was participating. Everybody from every angle tried to help, and we ultimately we found it, and we came to a conclusion that worked out for all parties.
That's awesome. I know have you have to dance around a lot of what you're saying. I totally respect that. I won't dig too much. How long did this one take to close in total?
It was pretty quick. I'd say they closed within maybe 25 days, which so like cash transactions here, usually going to be about 30 days. If it's financing, maybe 45 to 60 days. I don't know how it is up there, but it's a little different than, let's say, New York, where in New York you send out maybe like offer sheets or whatever the case may be. The attorneys take their time to draft everything, and it's kind of at the hands of the attorneys. And they're like, okay, we've settled on the contract. We're going to send it out and we're going to close X amount of days from this. For us, we have pre-drafted contracts that are, in our systems, our MLS, our brokers, and we can essentially we can't revise the contracts, but we can fill in the blanks. So it makes it a lot quicker, especially if you know the contract in and out, which we're not only with the experience, but our brokers and our sales managers and everybody has kind of drilled into us that these we need to understand what we're putting out there. Also, I have my closest and dear friends are my attorneys also, and they're the best in Miami. I've learned a lot from them, and having them as a resource has been extremely helpful. So we're able to expedite relative to maybe a place like New York. I don't know about where you are.
In the Bay Area, we can do it at like hair on fire speed. Cash, the quickest cash I've ever closed was 3 days.
Wow, holy cow.
We don't use attorneys. We use escrow officers. And then through the San Francisco MLS, they give us basically all the contracts. And then once both parties sign, then it's ratified, and that's the gospel. Unless there's a problem. If there's a problem, then it goes to attorneys. But with listings here, we tend to do all of the disclosures up front before we even list a property. So then the buyer has all the information plus inspection reports. So unless they have questions or a concern like where's the septic tank, which we don't have those here, but if they did, as long as there's no questions, then typically buyers will then feel confident to potentially write a contingent free offer. So then your other two contingencies are either financing or appraisals. And if it's cash, you don't need either. No one's requiring either. There's no fail point.
I can't imagine not being able, or not necessarily not being able, but not inspecting the property prior to buying it, even if another inspection was done. That's an interesting, uh, you know, what method that you guys go with there. Which I mean, I think look, it helps both parties having an understanding ahead of time. But yeah, I mean, I like to be able to kind of walk through with my inspector, who I've used the same company since 2011, and they are amazing. But they teach me so much about each property and each house, and not only that, but ways to prevent whatever is happening from happening and getting worse. But that's interesting that they do that ahead of time there.
I feel what that was birthed out of, it's not necessarily best practice, but what it was birthed out of is highly competitive environments when you have 20 super competitive offers coming in, and it's okay, we don't want contingencies. So how do we start as a seller mitigating those? What are the questions they're going to ask? Well, why don't we just give those in advance? And San Francisco it's 7 by 7 miles. And so there's only so many general contractors inspectors here. There's only so many pest inspectors. There's only so many sewer lateral inspectors. And so if you're an agent who's doing transactions here and you see a report come in, you know if it's one of the good inspectors who did it, or if it's somebody who's like out of some town that's 50 miles from here. That's when I tell my client, like, I don't know. Like, I can't vouch for this inspector. I've never seen their name before. I've never seen their work. We should probably have this. We should have another pre-inspection done before you even write this offer, because this one's sketchy. But to go back and answer your question, cash could be fast. It's basically how fast can you move the money from account A to B and you're done.
Wow.
If a buyer is underwritten, 18 to 21, 24 days ish. And then if they're only pre-approved, probably 24 to 30 days to close.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah. And what about, do you guys have, I imagine you have like municipal lien searches, things like this where you're relying upon another party to deliver documents that you need for closing, or are those done with the inspections ahead of time?
The statutory documents, we have a 3R report, which is a history report of all the permits pulled. We have a natural hazards to kind of show the geological surroundings of the property. Like, is it on earthquake land? Like, is it on a fault zone? Like, where is it sitting? So written into the contract, there's a handful of these documents that they're third party reports that have to be produced. So that's where the seller just produces them in advance. And so they serve it in advance. So then the buyer, when they write the offer, they're already then privy to this information, and they're basing their decision on having that information in advance. And again, I think, if you look at, which is wild to me, that all 50 states do everything, we do it differently. There's no standardization. I think the way we do it comes with, like, there's good qualities about it and there's really bad qualities. And then I think the way your market is, I think there's really great qualities and really bad qualities. And it's a beast. That's for sure.
I don't know if you've gotten into this in any of the other podcasts, and if you have, you can let me know. But so in Miami, a big thing here, insurance wise, is not only with the hurricanes you think of the first thing, but flood zones. So where you guys are, is there are there properties that are more difficult to insure and therefore finance based on their location relative to potential earthquake threats? How does that work?
Yeah. So one of the reports I just mentioned, the natural hazard, when that one gets pulled, you have an idea of what the property's on. If you're looking just outside of the city, it'll also include, there's areas that are mudslide or like some sort of land movement. There's fire zones, and then we have kind of tsunami zones and liquefaction, which is landfill. And so there's these different things with the land. So yes, depending on if you're in one of the high risk fire zones, it could be a challenge getting, like, when you see California on the news and they say these fires are washing through, it's in zones, and California is pretty dry most places throughout the year. And so these areas just become a high risk of that. And so, yes, if you're in these certain areas, San Francisco, not so much, though there is liquefaction, landfill, versus the original solid earth. There's nuances to it, is probably the easiest way to say it.
So I guess I'm feeling how I would feel if I was a buyer moving to Florida and being worried about hurricanes, because like, as somebody that's in Miami, you've seen it over years, and what happens, where you're going to be safe. You're going to be safe, uh, for most of the storms that come through. But thinking about an earthquake, a mudslide, these fires, I mean, it's overwhelming. So I imagine that might be one of the conversations you have to have with buyers that are moving to California for the first time. And I don't even know how you would start that conversation. That's interesting, very interesting.
It's interesting, but with earthquakes, which is usually the thing that most people are concerned about, most houses are not damaged from the earthquake. They're damaged from the fire that happens after it. Because gas lines will break, things will happen, and then because the whole area is in chaos, now you have these other suite of problems happening. So typically buyers aren't the ones concerned about it. It's their parents who don't live in the area in the ear of the buyer, creating concern. But I would say, out of all the concerns, liquefaction, which is landfill, is probably the thing people are most concerned about. And it's it's riddled throughout the city. Like you can't say this is specifically is or is not in liquefaction or not. So I mean, I just tell clients, look at the property, we'll pull the reports, and then we can find out in the next step. But I don't have a way to just give you a blanket statement, because it's literally throughout the city. If you look at the city, or if you ever visit here,
It's been a long time.
there's no creeks, there's no ponds, there's no rivers. It's because we've built over them. And so they're there, they're just filled in. And so I don't know where they all are. Like, and there's no way any one person can. I guess there is a way, but it's way too cumbersome for an agent to know that. So that's why we rely on these reports. So, I mean, the conversation I have with my clients is it just has to be exploratory. There's areas of the city that is more likely that it's on solid earth. And then there's other areas of the city that's more likely on landfill. But until we see the reports, we won't have a definitive answer.
Have you ever had to do any environmental testing that would give you more clarity, at least, or an understanding? Or so how, I guess, beyond, how do you determine beyond these initial like background reports? I mean, has there ever been any extensive diligence that you've had to do on a transaction?
Once, there was only one property that I had to, and it was a really interesting, super cool property. It was on the very top of a hill. So just imagine that for starters. And in the garage, basically going from the high side of the hill to the low side, there was a channel actually cut into the concrete that went from the mud sill down the foundation wall, down across the floor into the drain. And there was a steady trickle of water. Not a lot, but just steady. Active, but not a lot, like just like a little trickle. And there was apparently a natural spring right there. And they basically just created a route for the spring to come out and go into the drain to leave. And the channel they cut was the solution. There's no way to stop it. And so on that property, my clients did a bunch of research, and we had some additional, we had all kinds of inspections performed on that property.
Yeah, did they end up moving forward with it, or?
No, they actually didn't proceed with that property because the seller wanted an egregious amount for the property that it wasn't worth. And so it never materialized. My clients actually bought a house diagonal, better price, better view. So they wound up actually getting a much better deal. But that was the only time we really had to do a wild, incredible, like big deep dive. I mean, most of the properties, the Victorian properties, they're 100 years old. And so there's usually not too many questions. Buyers don't have too many questions about that stuff unless there's a concern. Like unless there's an underground storage tank, or unless there's like something funky going on that's creating another question mark somewhere. But generally people don't just want to explore it for the sake of exploring it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I would have passed on that house too if I was, the natural spring. As cool as it sounds, I don't think I would like to take on that risk. But that's just me. There's people that are more uh, receptive to taking on these type of things. But yeah, no, I can't even imagine. Yeah, there was one house here where we had to do some diligence, maybe not as extensive, but it was a house, a relatively new house that was built on a canal, and the soil had been stuffed and propped up. And the house was showing signs of settlement, which, there were cracks. So we had a structural engineer come out and say, it's hard for me to tell. I think that it's possible that nothing is going on, there's no problems, but it's also possible that the soil is settling and you need to dig into the soil, have a company come out, test it, and that's how you're going to find out. So having that conversation with the buyer, not only with the buyer, my client, but with the seller. That and the seller wrapping their head around that. I mean, that's some again these like you mentioned these challenges that you have to work through, and these are extreme cases. This is not standard that happens on every transaction. But yeah, we did have a company come in and dig up the soil, and turned out everything was okay. But that was another learning process for me, and something that you don't experience. Probably, I would say most agents here don't ever have to go through, and getting through them. And I think it just prepares us for other circumstances. If you take the time to learn and listen to the people who know what they're talking about, then the next time you see the cracks, you're going to be able to tell, like, hey, I've seen this before. This type of crack would signify that there is settlement and that it's something under the foundation, or this crack, it's okay. This is natural. It happens. But we should still get it looked at by the inspector when he comes, and we'll point it out, have them give our opinion. But it's always fun.
I 100% agree. And it's the hardest transactions I've had. They're the ones that teach you the most. I know it's totally cliche. We all say that, but it's very, very true. And, it also helps going through that and living through it because we understand how to talk to our clients a little bit differently. But then also when you look at something and your client has a question, you have a different answer, meaning you can look at it and say, I've dealt with this before. I know the inspector we can call. And instead of trying to call 50 inspectors and figuring out who's not only going to come out, but who's also going to give your clients an informative and educational answer without freaking them out.
Yeah, I think that that's the most important part is, in my opinion, is being able to give the client the information, whatever that information is, to allow them to make an educated decision. Sometimes there's not going to be a definitive answer, where it's like, hey, yes, here's exactly what's going to happen or exactly what is not going to happen. It's here's what we know, here are the possibilities, here are the risks, and here's the likelihood that you may have to take on that risk, and allow them, as long as you can give them everything to put in front of them for them to take time and make a decision, and more importantly, having the time to make that decision. I think generally speaking, you set yourself up to have the best possible outcome in that scenario.
Our philosophy on the back end of our team is lead with relationship. And essentially, how do we do that? How do we give the client the information and enough time to form an educated choice so they know how to proceed? And years down the road, they look back on that experience and they still like us. Like we didn't push them through the transaction only because we wanted a paycheck, but knowing that we're actually trying to transform them into a client for life. When they're ready to sell, we want to get the call. So it's not a matter of if they call, it's just a matter of when they call, because they can actually trust us to manage our time, manage their expectations, guide them through the choices and selections. And I feel like it's a very important nuanced piece that elevates our industry. And it's one of those slow down to go fast components that if you just take your time with your client, guide them, and really just genuinely think about the future of, I want them 5 years from now to think about his experience. And it was stressful. There was a lot going on, but they knew that I was there for them.
Absolutely. And I think if you, like, let's sit back and rationalize it real quick. Like, how many buyers have canceled the transaction because they found something out and actually not bought with you right after that again? I guess, like, for me, yeah, I mean, it's a very low number.
It's a hovering around zero. Like it's a very, very, very low number.
We're going to make a sale, and for me and for my team, it's very important to make sure that the client, again, and they can, as long as they have all of the information to make a decision, an educated decision, whether or not it's what I recommend or don't recommend, as long as they can make that decision, and I've done everything I can to get them that information, one way or another, we're going to get a transaction done, and they're going to be as happy as they could possibly be. I think there's only been like maybe a very small number that, we found something out and they canceled the transaction and then didn't end up buying. with me. Maybe they bought something else. Maybe it happened like one time. So I think that just goes to show that it's like, it's not based on let's close this transaction. It's let's make the right decision. Let's take our time. And it can be very stressful, especially for people that aren't used to transacting. I think we're so used to it that we forget sometimes that there are people out there who haven't bought real estate in 30 years, and it can be pretty, or ever, and it can be pretty stressful. And I mean, you know, I don't know I hope it's better there, but in Miami, sometimes the people on the other side that you're dealing with make it a little bit more stressful than it has to be. Um, Hopefully you
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Hopefully, yeah, a little bit better there. But when we do have another broker on the other side or management company or attorney that we're used to dealing with, and we know, provides, they're going to do what it takes to get the transaction done. It's such a blessing. But yeah, it's you get so caught up in like how many times we've done this, we've seen it, and then there's people that literally have not. We're closing on Monday with a lovely family that they haven't bought a house in 30 years. And, you're buying an older condo in Miami that they have their own nuances in the older condos. There's so many intricacies that, with especially what the tragedy that happened in Surfside, uh, uh, you know, more inspection reports, more engineering reports, reserves that need to be funded, special assessments to make sure that the structure is completely sound and whatever work needs to be done. And you're not talking about, like let's paint the building. It's there's concrete restoration that needs to be done in some of these buildings, especially being so close to the water. So then it's like okay, not only are you buying, you're transacting for the first time in 30 years, but you have to swallow that. Okay, now I have a potential assessment. There's concrete restoration that's going to go on. What else is going to happen next since the building doesn't have all of the funds because they're being depleted to restore the garage? And I think being there for them and helping them through that, even if, it's not the perfect transaction, they're still going to be so grateful and thankful that you were there to support them through that time.
Amen. Yes, all of that. I think it's so incredibly important that we put ourselves aside and just really remember our fiduciary obligation from beginning to end throughout the entire experience on their behalf. And I feel like I've straight up blown up deals. Like I've walked properties with clients after I've had a consultation with them and they're saying, we want to spend this much money. We're willing to do small projects, maybe paints. And then like next thing you know, we're standing in a fixer that needs everything from a foundation to a roof. And I'm like, that's not what you said. That's not what we discussed. And I'm here now showing you like literally, this is what you shared with me. This is not the property you think it is. And all that stuff you've watched on TV is not true. So like, let's recalibrate you here a little bit. Yeah, I've actually recommended more than once clients just walk away from a property. And I had one of my clients who's now a really good friend. That situation, him and his wife wanted a really nice move-in ready. They were about to have a kid and they wound up finding a fixer. And I just was like, look, like, here's the reality. It's going to take you 2 years to get to the house that you actually want. It's going to cost you probably X amount of dollars. It's going to it's this and that. And I laid it all out for them. And then they were bummed. They wound up walking away. They bought another property. And then I was over for dinner, maybe like 6 months after, and they're like, hey, Shawn, we just really want to thank you for steering us away from that other property. They're like, it's actually still under construction. And they're like, we're thankful that you told us to just avoid that one like the plague.
Funny enough, one of my good friends who live close by, we saw, this was when a time where there were actually options and you can pick the house that you wanted.
Imagine that.
Yeah, it's so far away from that reality now, but I'm getting a little bit better. But yeah, so I mean, we saw so many different houses, and they're younger couple, young professionals, very successful, but still also younger, and it was their first house. And we saw some beautiful houses that were older that needed a lot of work and a lot of maintenance. and they were planning on having a child sometime soon. Also, so it sounds like a similar situation. And they, you know, they when they refer me to people now, they lead by saying that, Charles told us no more times than he told us yes. And, we're so glad that we listened to him, and they ended up in a beautiful house, like almost brand new construction, got a really good deal. And I mean, now it's the market has shifted since then. So they have a lot of equity, and they're very happy there. And, it's nice to have them close by too. But yeah, no, it's, interesting times out here.
It's funny. I don't know why I thought of this, but when I was coaching with my team is, imagine when you go to a restaurant, right? And you're asking, there's fish and chicken and steak and all this stuff on the menu. And you ask the waiter or waitress, what's good here? Like, what do you recommend? And they're like, oh, the fish is amazing. The steak is really good. You can't go wrong with the chicken. And then they're like, we'll give you a minute. I'll be right back. And they leave. And you're like, that was useless information. Like, you just told me everything's good and you just renamed everything I was reading. But instead, if they kind of leaned in, looked over their shoulder and said, the fish is a day old, I wouldn't recommend it. It's not bad. It's just not my favorite. But the steak, it's phenomenal. I'll leave you a minute and come back. Like, automatically, the trust goes way up. Even if the fish isn't, there's nothing wrong with it. The trust goes through the roof because they're now steering you in a good direction. And then so when they now recommend wine and they say, if you'd like a nice glass of red with that steak, I would highly recommend this. You're like, yeah, let's try it. Versus the other person, you order the fish and you're like, oh, how about the wine? And they like list off 10 more wines. And you're like, that's useless. You're just reading me the menu. Like, I think for realtors is don't read the menu, be personal, really listen to people, and then just give them. I love this piece of advice. I don't know where I picked it up from, but it was treat everybody like your best friend, like your mom, best friend, same category, or a celebrity, not or and. If a celebrity calls, you're going to answer the phone no matter what you're doing or where you are, right? Or you're going to be like, I'll be right back. Just give me 2 minutes. I'll call you right back. And if it's your mom or best friend or sibling, you're going to take care of them. And so if you're responsive and attentive, like the celebrity, but you're actually taking care of them, your business is fine. Like, your business will double year over year, just virtue of that. Like, that's so much quality right there. And you would never tell your best friends if you go to a barbecue and they're like, hey, what's good? And you just name off everything on the table. Like, that's not what you do. But you'd be like, hey man, try the ribs. They're killer. Eat that first.
It's interesting too, because I'm the same way, generally speaking, in terms of, like, I feel like I have to reply almost immediately to, certain things. I try maybe on the weekend if it's not important, or if it's at night, maybe for tomorrow. But when we are looking for service, generally speaking, we're all the time we're on, and it's like us providing a service, whether it be just answering questions, whatever. But when we're looking for a service, when I send an email out, I expect a response right away. And I'm like, what is this person doing? Well, like, what could you be doing other than working? But it's funny how our brains work. But I mean, there's so many brokers out there, particularly in Miami, and it's like, if you don't have that relationship with that person, and you're not the first to reply, and you don't reply in a timely manner, they're going to move on to somebody else. And obviously, I mean, look, relationships are most important, but we don't always have relationships when we meet somebody for the first time. So I think it's very important, to reply in a timely fashion. And it feels good to be on the other end of that too. When you send that email out, like, for example, I have a doctor, local doctor, who it's kind of like this a different type of like a concierge doctor per se. And when everybody else tells me their stories about, oh, I would call the doctor, but then I have to make an appointment to see him, to ask him anything. And like, I email my doctor and I get a reply in like 2 hours. I'm like, how is this the experience that he's providing? And then I want to tell everybody, like, hey, you need to switch to this guy, because no matter what's going on, he always responds to me. And that's, again, that's just like the same thing with us, is like, yeah, if you're there for them and you're there relatively quickly, they're going to feel good about that service, good enough to tell their friends, good enough to tell their family, their colleagues. And I think that that's, at least for me, where the all of my business comes from. And I think the same for you.
Yeah, tenfold. I would say 90, a solid 90% of my business is just straight referral. And it's enough to keep us and the team very busy. I bank with First Republic, and they're local to out here. And the person who set up my account, I literally, something glitched on the app. The true story. And I text him and said, "Hey, I can't transfer money from one account to the other. Can you help?" And he writes back, "Hey, I'm in Tahoe. I'm going to send an email and loop in my team. Keep an eye out for it." A minute later, an email comes in. And the guy's like, "Is now an okay time to call you?" I was like, "Sure." Calls me. Like, literally, it's this quick. I get on the phone. He's like, "How much are you trying to transfer from what account to what account?" And then took care of it. And he said, "All right, cool. It's taken care of. You'll see it it hit in a minute. There's an issue, obviously, with the app. I'm going to start a new thread. You don't have to respond. I'm just letting you know." And then a minute later, it was like, "Hey, Shawn's having trouble with the app. Can we look into it?" And they created a ticket. It blew my mind at how on top of it everybody was. And it was obviously so profound that I'm sharing the story with you. It's the same story I share with my clients of like, "Hey, you're looking for lenders. Sure, they may not give you the best rates, but if you want phenomenal service, this is it." Whereas I have another bank that starts with a SC, and I don't use them anymore. I'm on hold for 45 minutes. And it's just like this endless loop of like, "Your call's really important to us." And you're like, "It's not, clearly." Yeah. But I think too, to go back to being on top of it, I think there's also a very subtle nuance of being on top of it, but also not giving the perception that you don't have anything going on. And I think that's a very subtle piece. Like, for example, if I called intentionally trying to hit a voicemail of my doctor, knowing they're going to get voicemails on Monday, and I just want to book an appointment, but I called at 9:30 on Sunday and somebody actually answered, I would actually be taken back, and not in a good way. I'd probably be like, "Man, I don't know if I want to go to that doctor." But if they called me first thing in the morning, that would be awesome. But I've gotten call or texts recently. I got a text from somebody wanting to sell, and it was Sunday. It was like a Sunday at 7. And I literally text back right away, "I'm with my family. Can I call you on Monday at 8 a.m.? And they said, "Sure, no problem." And at 8 a.m., right on the money, I called them. And so I think, again, there's a way to be incredibly responsive without being needy or showing that you just have all this time because you're not working with somebody, so you can just be at their beck and call at any given second. And I think texting is hands down the easiest and you can set up the easy auto response like, "Hey, sorry, blah, blah, blah. I'll call you back in X amount of minutes," which is, but it's that level of just, again, if you call somebody, an agent, and they say, "Hey, I'm back to back until 3:00. Is it cool if I call you then?" And then they do that, that still keeps them in the running.
Of course. Yeah. I think that they just want to hear from you. They want to know that you're there. And I mean, I was at dinner with my friends who, their family are clients of mine, and the same thing. It's like, they're saying like, "We know that we can reach you no matter what time. And if you're busy, you're going to let us know immediately that you're busy, and you'll call us back as soon as you're not." And everybody's okay with that. And, if it's an emergency, that's a different situation. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's it's very important. And also, the majority of people are reasonable. They know that they are busy at times too, and they'll wait for your call. And if they don't, then I mean, you have to decide, is that person worth taking your time if that's how they're going to start the relationship out. but case by case scenario. I mean, it could be that this is the only time that they have to talk, or they actually have an emergency, and you just have to make the decision there from based on your experience.
100%. Like I've had clients literally overseas in contract on a property, and there's this small weird window of time, and it's an obscure hour. Of course, I'm gonna. If it's an hour I don't work, or like I'm normally like in bed or whatever it is, I of course am going to adjust. But it's case by case, and if we're not in contracts and something's not blowing up, like there's the nuance of knowing, the importance hierarchy, and framing it. But I also think it's we talked about this very, very, very early on, is having balance, and having balance is setting up boundaries, and having those hours of Sunday is usually my night with my family. So I don't take appointments. I don't go look at properties. I don't, unless it's like a dire straight emergency and this contract is blowing up, then yes, I will adjust. But if you just want to call and chop it up about how the market is, you're waiting until Monday. I'm going to push you off.
Sundays are the best days to relax, enjoy family time, and I think it's very important. I mean, again, we're fortunate enough to be close to my parents, but Anna's family is also very close to us, and we set aside time Sunday afternoons to see them, and that's in my opinion, sounds like yours as well. Those Sunday evenings, Sunday afternoons are a great way to end the weekend, and a great way to start the week with the people that you love, and just having a little bit of time to disconnect. And we have the nephews; they're 7 and 3, and you run around like a little kid and throw the ball at them. They throw a ball at you, and it's just like everything that is serious and important in life kind of goes away for about 30-45 minutes while you're chasing them. And then afterwards, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know how people do this 24/7. Like I'm exhausted after 30 minutes, but eventually, I guess I'll have to find out one day if we're lucky enough. But it's a great time to disconnect, and I think it also prepares you for the week. And I'm right there with you on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, to use a metaphor, it's like erasing the chalkboard. You have to erase the chalkboard before you can start writing more stuff on it, and like at least have one day where you can just start fresh, regroup, and then go back to work excited again and not burnt out, especially as markets shift and stressful clients are popping up here and there. Just figure it out so you can at least have some semblance of sanity in your life moving forward. Well, Charles, you've actually been my longest conversation so far, and I appreciate that.
It felt so natural. I mean, I guess I think we're kind of used to speaking to each other by now, and I do wish we would have more people join us on these monthly calls. It seems like the numbers have trickled down a little bit, but we do get a great opportunity to speak to each other monthly, which is nice. And hopefully we'll chat soon. And we still, I think, have to get together in either Miami over there, or somewhere in between, and hopefully sometime soon.
Absolutely. Well, if nothing else, we'll all be syncing up at the retreat. That is for sure.
That very true. Looking forward to it.
Cool, man. Well, that is a wrap